August 17th. My goodness, of 2023. I'm going to be your host tonight, Dana Durnford. You can feel free to call in at 709-589-4406. All lines are open. Just ask for Dana. I'll be right there. And so, I got a poll for everybody tonight. I don't know if anybody noticed. Our pro-nuclear media who claim Fukushima nuclear water only has tritium, and they don't even call it tritium-3H, because there's actually a difference. Are they actually mass murdering monsters? And you'll be the judge before the show is over. Pretty sure you'll have enough information to make up your own mind. So the reason they're talking about tritium is because the official story is nothing got out of the buildings. Now they're going to talk about Chernobyl and how all the helicopter pilots died. But I'll explain to you after. Oh, I turned the volume down, did I? Anyway, long story short, that was Harvard. I clipped that out of a Harvard lecture post-Fukushima. And Yale, Stanford, Oxford, MIT, all the Commonwealth, major shakers and movers. Right, we went through every one of their... I hesitate to call them a presentation because it was pure propaganda. But they did acknowledge that all the helicopter pilots at Chernobyl died. And Chernobyl was a single reactor. These are 2 Fukushima reactors. And each of these reactors are pure uranium, pure plutonium. And Chernobyl wasn't very big, and it was mostly graphite. So there's a significant difference in the quality and quantity of the fuels involved. This is much more, dare I say it, insidious, because reactor 3 over there was a mixed oxide fuel reactor. And so they were using isotopes that have already gone through a chain reaction. The significance of that was that once it goes through starts the chain reaction, not necessarily going all the way through the chain reaction, that's still applicable, but once it even starts, the atoms now are 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. And so that's catastrophic to everything with replicating cells, including the fungus and the bacteria, which is important for the ecosystem. Because if you kill fungus and bacteria off the ecosystem, the forests and the land and that doesn't soak up water anymore. So that's why you've seen all these flash floods worldwide. So when Fukushima happened, let me go back to that picture. I apologize. So as soon as the nuclear scientists, any nuclear scientists worldwide, seen these pictures, these were the original pictures, they knew the fuel pools in the reactor cores were gone because they're at the very top of the buildings. These were 65 meter, 190 foot, 19-story buildings. And what I found incredible in 2013 when I put these pictures together, this is a decade ago now, hard to believe that much time has gone by and the world is still complacent. Here's the media, and you're talking about the big media. You're talking about CBS and Seth Dorn. You're talking about, which is a senator's son, by the way, and the biggest media in the United States. BBC is the biggest media in the United Kingdom, Ireland, Scotland included. And Rupert Winfield Hayes done the same thing for Reactor 3, which is also missing. Pretended that it wasn't. CNN, of course, we don't expect any less than that. And ABC, which is Australia's biggest media, Cecilia Vega, who is currently a press a journalist for the press club at the White House. And so you get promoted if you're exceptionally ruthless. And that's pretty ruthless to pretend you're in a building that don't exist. And why would you? Because you got to put the video production managers, everybody, the audio, the crew. It takes a big crew to make these people look reasonably human. All of them had to participate. All the medias themselves, when they aired this on TV, everybody at the medias had to participate in all. And all the academics, all the nuclear students worldwide, when they seen this, them claiming they were on top of that building, knew this was a lie. And they knew they had to tell that lie over and over to convince their families they weren't scumbags. But it's hard to fool family, right? This is Fallout based on, and I put the radioactive. So this is France's model of 1 million to 10 million atoms per cubic meter of air. And what I did was I superimposed my version of radioactive fallout. And so the more fallout there is, the thicker the radioactive fallout. And the significance of it is it's the same as a snowstorm, except there's much more. And snow melts and goes away, but this doesn't. This is here for millions of years. So think of a snowstorm that instead of radioactive plume covering the planet, and that model is based on 31 days, think of an invisible plume that covers the planet, and it's actually radiation, but it has the same attributes in numbers-wise as, say, snowfall. So think of a snow that never melts, never goes away, and covers the whole planet after 30 days, and for millions of years, it just snows all day, every day, and it never goes away, it never stops, right? So now flip that to radiation, and Fukushima was a pulse event. So we already got 80 years of these emissions and dumping and releases and accidents into the environment. So the media is taking great pleasure, and they know the difference, right? Obviously, they know the difference. And they take great pleasure in, this is how they make their paycheck, writing these stories or putting their names on the stories, because a lot of the nuclear lobbying groups write the stories. And they moved the goalpost July the 13th of this year. So before we get into the news cycle, unfortunately, I got to go through all of this to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to be aware of it. Science outweighs irrational reasoning. This was a professor of quantum and nuclear engineering in South Korea. He said 1,000 tanks had the equivalent of 2.2 grams of tritium, which is probably what they're saying too. Obviously, they lost their entire inventories, which is millions and millions of pounds per building. And, when you got a professor of nuclear quantum engineering telling you it's the equivalent to throwing 3 grams of sugar into the ocean or 3 sugar cubes into the sea, and what they're talking about is nuclear meltdowns, then you are in real trouble. Okay, so to suggest that tritium, and out of tritium, there is tritium, obviously, because it's such a complicated story for the average person. They have no hope at all of figuring it out on their own. Just it's zero possibility. There's too many facets, and they're very good at keeping you divided. They did pick up 30 million one-ton bags. And the food was banned in 14 prefectures by 55 countries for over a decade. And so to suggest any tritium got out, tritium single is very weak, but it's very dangerous isotope, by the way. But tritium would have been drowned out by the curium isotopes, which is the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rods. And curium isotopes need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. And you remember when he banned the food for a decade, nobody said it was banned because of tritium. It was banned because of other isotopes, right? Okay, so we're finally, I think we're ready to start the show. Hello, everybody. I'm Dana Durnford. Hi, everyone. Yeah, if you're wondering how to vote and you can't see, because I see colored, and I've seen quite a few people say that the poll is actually missing on their end. And so almost every one of my polls is a yes vote. So look for wherever that yes is now, mark it in your mind. That's where you try to click. If you can't see it on your end. And so the censorship on my end is nasty. Here's one of the tricks they're actually doing to me. At the end of my show the other night, they said I had 41 views, right? Let me fix this here. I forgot something to add to it. This is ludicrous to suggest I only had 41 people on my show, obviously. Here we go. I'm almost ready. Yeah. I kind of forgot. Here we go. So I had 125 views, people dropped by my show, my last show. It was a long show, but officially he said I only had 41 views, but I got 46 thumbs up. So everybody and a few ghosts gave me thumbs up. And then the video before that, we had 85 viewers, and I had 11 views at the end of the show, right? So it's very difficult for my numbers to work their way up. When the show was over, the show was 2 hours, 36 minutes exactly. And 10 hours later, it was still 2 hours, 36 minutes. But with my videos, when you get to 12 hours, or on the 13th hour, the time will change, and it'll be another 7 to 10 seconds. In this case, it was 10. I got an extra 10 seconds. So they're putting something in my video, most likely to track you, to get a statistic on who's watching my stuff. Today, they gave me a big surprise. To make external links clickable, first complete a one-time verification, Dina. So you can give them your IDs, and this is to eliminate spam. Now, if they don't know who I am, we're in real trouble, because I've been around a long time. I've been around longer than a lot of people that works at YouTube have. So the events feature, you can do video verification. That's where you got to, and I've done that one. Or you give them the IDs, or you can wait a couple months for channel history. So they all take a long time. And I went over, and sure enough, I didn't have access anymore to the events like live streams and other things, right? And I couldn't put links under my videos tonight. You know, it might have noticed. You have to go back to my last videos if you want to donate. The links are always at the bottom. But tonight there's no links. I couldn't put the links there until I passed the verification, which could take 24 hours. And you can be sure in my case it'll take 24 hours. So I done use video verification. So they sent me an email. I had to get on my cell phone. I had to do all kinds of weird faces. And then Google puts that in their artificial intelligence software. Now, because I produce probably around 2,200 presentations since Fukushima, then I don't mind making a video. It doesn't mean nothing to me, right? I do so much. So if they want my 30-second video, good for them. We had a poll. The last poll we had, is Fukushima's nuclear fallout, 4 melter reactors and 8 fuel pools the catalysts behind the current extinction level event? And this event has been put into play 80 years ago with the constant nuclear testing. You know, the French Polynesians were exposed to the equivalent of one Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Well, actually, it was a plutonium bombs they were using in France on the French Bikini, or the French Polynesian Islands. So it was almost the equivalent of nuclear Nagasaki, because that was a plutonium bomb. Hiroshima was a uranium bomb, but they were both hideous, obviously, but both by Julius Oppenheimer. And it was equal to one of them every week for 12 years. And the Bikini Islands was equal to one every day for 12 years. 1 1/4 every day for 12 years of Hiroshima bombs worth of radioactive fallout. And currently, there's 1 million square kilometers, not miles, but kilometers, of the Bikini Atoll, the Marshall Islands, I should say. They're one and the same, but their real name is Marshall Islands. There's currently in 2019 study 1 million square kilometers is a nuclear wasteland. Okay, here we go. Spreading the truth about Fukushima. What an interesting way to phrase a lie, because that's what they're talking about is a lie. A Canadian Japanese university professor is working with the people of Fukushima to debunk damaging false rumors about the Fukushima nuclear accident. And, that's pretty dishonest to say that the rumors about Japan are... Because as I showed you at the beginning of the show, I walked you through 2 of the reactors. There's 4 of them actually melted down. And that the fallout, there's many, many different models of different isotopes in the fallout. None of them are tritium. And so this is a very dishonest person. He's a professor, and he's ruining children's lives with his position. William McMichael, associate professor. He's not even a real professor on top of that. He's a real bad person, but he's not even a professor. Spreading the truth about Fukushima, and they were using these characters, these little cartoon characters, to indoctrinate the most vulnerable of society that they didn't evacuate. That should still be, like everybody in Hiroshima city should be evacuated, for instance. Spreading the truth about Fukushima. So he brings international students into the Fukushima Prefecture, to the nuclear wasteland, and indoctrinates them. He's quite proud of it, apparently. Tsunami level indicator. Tsunami level indicator. Now, there's tons of documentation of how radioactive the water was at the site. These are lethal doses, and these can't be caused by tritium. And tritium-3H at that. Whenever you hear tritium, they're misrepresenting even that, right? Spreading the truth. And so he gets access to all kinds of kids, and he indoctrinates them into propaganda. And if you go back to the original stories, researchers too frightened to get closer than 100 kilometers from the meltdown. That never goes away, right? He's a very, very dangerous psychopath, and probably should be locked up for life for what he's doing. This is Medusa. They built this contraption they got there off-site and brought it in to manipulate you and coerce you and trick you and the rest of the planet into believing that they're in the fuel pool at the top of the buildings that don't even exist. This is CNN pretending they're in a building that don't exist. So he was on TV. You can see all the notes he got in front of him. He spends most of his time looking down at his notes. And he showed pictures of smiling, gullible, vulnerable young children that he's manipulating, deceiving, and harming by putting them into the nuclear wasteland itself. High levels of radioactivity found extensively, and they're not talking about tritium. Japan says the air 150 kilometers from Fukushima plant is radioactive as areas close to the meltdown. And so remember, they built a museum for $50 million rather, and it's what you can see the nuclear meltdowns. And so this is a model at the museum. Now the museum wouldn't take the records from many of the major prefectures that documented all the volunteers and the victims and the chaos during the meltdowns. They threw that in the rubble. Very selective what they have in that place. I was quite disgusted that he done the things he done, said the things that he said, and portrayed the things, and claimed that there was no adverse side effects. That's a murderer, right? You're not gonna. All you're gonna do is he's associate. So he got that title to give him some street creds, but he's not a very good human. He has a family too and children, and so you can imagine how abusive. He's the kind of guy that if he commits suicide, if he thinks he's going to get caught, he'll kill his children and his wife. Air samples in Tokyo, 270 times more contaminated with cesium-137 in global weapons follow peak. So him claiming, and I'm on mainstream media, claiming there's no radioactive fallout there, and everything is a harmful rumor, is quite frightening. The whole planet was covered in 19.5 days, 468 hours. And that model is only based on venting. It's not even based on the actual inventories from the melted reactors. Like we got a real problem. Everybody's living in denial. And they don't understand how late it is, how far down the hole that we are. Because we are in real trouble. Just not a game. The world needs to wake up. High radiation level detected in Japan's Fukushima nuclear plant workers' nose. Well, look, if it's in his nose, it's in his eyebrows, it's in his ears, he breathed it in, he absorbed it through his skin. You're talking about you can put 200 million atoms in the head of a needle, but you can't see it. You really think that won't go through your skin? And, you're sweating in this hot environment, so you're soaking it in the sweat too, see? It sticks to the sweat, and then it ends up with it. Then all the clothing, if you go there, all the clothing should be thrown away. You should shave your head right away when you get out of there, and all your nose hair when you get out of there right away too. You're in a nuclear wasteland. That's a nuclear wasteland. You can't even move into the communities, Akuma and Futaba, on both sides, north and south of it. And you wouldn't want to. The air samples in Tokyo, so Tokyo, 36 million people, metropolitan Tokyo, should have evacuated. These are catastrophic numbers. But you should have evacuated the coastline of the northern hemisphere. Well, you should have evacuated the actual continent of North America. There's 220 million atoms of just the iodine-129. The 15 million year before it decays to another isotope. It's got a 150 million year lifespan, basically. So that's long past the human experience, I can assure you. And, desaturated the thyroid glands of insects and birds and mammals and animals and everything else. And your children, your loved ones, your elderly, your vulnerable. Everybody. Nobody escaped it. But in those on the west coast of North America got exceptional doses, because a lot of it washes comes in these plumes, clouds and plumes. And when they hit the mountains, they lose a lot of their payloads before they can rise over the mountain. And so a lot of that, not all of it by no shape or forms, but quite, a percentage of it anyway, washes back down to your coastlines. And that's why your coastlines were wiped out in such a short frame of time, because they're very vulnerable. They're exposed twice a day at the low tide. So when you got high radiation levels detected in the plant's worker's nose, there's zero possibility they didn't breathe it in. There's zero possibility that it didn't hit everywhere else. So in 2019, there's a study showing congenital heart disease operations for neonates and infants rose 14.2% per 100,000, which is 14,200 open heart surgeries for newborns out of every 100,000 children born. The whole world should have freaked out when that study came out in 2019. And Japan has worked diligently to try to play that down. High radiation levels detected in Fukushima nuclear plant workers' noses. Help wanted ad seeks employees able to carry out a conversation. So they weren't hiring nuclear scientists, nuclear academics, nuclear students, nuclear companies or anything, because they ain't going there. They're not going there. They're not in denial. They're not pretending that the reactors didn't melt down. They're like, no. You can't pay them enough money. It doesn't exist. You can come with them, transfer truck loads of cash. They're not going there. They might hire the vulnerable of society and send them there, or Shanghai them, but they're not going to go there physically because they won't get to spend their money down the road only on trying to survive. And the most tanks we can count in any of the pictures, and I have thousands, is 750 tanks. If you count all the small tanks, and if you over-exaggerate the numbers of each lot, then you end up with 750 tanks, not 1,000 tanks. The tanks were all built in 2013. Authorities said on Thursday a high level of radiation had been detected in the nose of a worker. Fears continue to rise after the plant was decommissioned. The plant's not decommissioned. You can't say the plant was decommissioned. It takes you 60 years to decommission a normal plant at retirement. These are multiple meltdowns. And the fuel pools, which had 5 or 6 reactor cores, which are no different than a running reactor core, have melted down also. There's 8 of them in 4 buildings. Previously, China and North Korea raised concerns when Japan started to gradually release the wastewater from the Fukushima Daiichi plant into the ocean. So that's quite the assertion. Well, it was an incredible lie. That's the only thing they seem to be really good at is incredible lies. They're proficient, actually, in telling incredible lies, right? They excel. That seems to be one of the... bear with me here, I'm just catching up. Almost there, we'll get there in a second. The big thing around here is nothing happens too fast. Each story is very important, and so and the thing is, every time you see these highlighted, I'm supposed to challenge that. And so ideally, you would get one in each story would have one spot there I got a challenge because you told, a little lie, right? No, not in this world. It's endless. Every paragraph got some kind of lie into it. Okay, here we go. To say they're hard cases is an understatement. I just wanted to get into the right spot. And the problem with me is I got so many right things. Here, let's try this one then. Alright. So this is Medusa. This is Reactor 3. You stand there, that's a lethal dose. The entire reactor core and the fuel pools at the top of the buildings are gone. Every nuclear scientist on the planet has seen that, would have known it. They don't need to see any diagrams. They're like, oh gosh, that's all gone. Beijing even announced it would completely suspend the import of aquatic products. Now, because just what we're trying to challenge was that they said on August the 24th, 2023 is when they first started releasing any emissions from the site. Well, look, they lost all the reactors and 8 fuel pools on day 5 by March the 16th, 2011. And so they totally changed the narrative. Well, this was United Nations, the International Atomic Energy Agency, their little belly button of evil is the ones who cooked up this narrative, because they're the ones who are certifying that Japan is in regulatory standards. There is no regulatory. These are mediacs. They've taken over your planet, and they succeeded in destroying the future of humanity and the 8 million species with literally no resistance. And the only way that can work is if they control all the media and all the universities and key positions in most of the governments worldwide. And my goodness, we're certainly seeing that, aren't we? Beijing has even announced that it would completely suspend the imports of sea products. But I mean, the food was banned from 14 prefectures for a decade by 55 countries. So they're leading you away from the well to a poison well by suggesting aquatic products and not even having the fortitude to call it the ocean, right? Because aquatic products would employ freshwater too, right? So Thursday, the radioactive materials may have touched the worker's face on Monday. May have touched his face. If you're within 100 miles of that site, there's no way you can stop it from touching your face, folks. He said that the employees were not experiencing any adverse health effects, and the full body scans showed no. You can't do a full body scan and say there's no internal radiation, for goodness sakes. But like that professor, not a real professor, but associate professor, he's not even a real professor, but he's the one they're putting up in the media. And he's not a professor of nuclear, so why is he in the media? It was the second such incident in 3 months after 4 workers were splashed with water. And this was allegedly why they were cleaning out the ELP system. Now, I done a video 4 videos back on the ELP system, dedicated to the ELP system. And my playlist is actually full of all the documentation, enough to win in any court case on top of that, to show that these are murderers. They're murdering your planet and all the species, and you're just a little tick in the bigger scope of things. You couldn't care less about the human. There was an evident apprehension when Japan released a treated water, this was artificially inflated, from its defunct. Does that look defunct to anybody? So like this completely, they refuse to acknowledge anything when they're describing it, right? After the International Atomic Energy Agency approved the plan, they approved a plan that alleges that 0.6 grams or 0.06 grams each year is released of tritium into the Pacific Ocean. And that it meets their standard, which is the IAEA is claiming that never happened. So what's the point to have an International Atomic Energy Agency, or UNSCLEAR, or IRPA, or the IPRC, or any of these other United Nations weaponized subsidy companies? The plant remained useless after nuclear accident, which occurred during the tsunami. They always got to throw that in, don't they? Releasing a large quantity of radioactive material. No, we released it all, every bit of it. And we're talking about 2 fuel pools full of decades of reactor cores at the top of the buildings that are gone too. Just these numbers. Each of the buildings are worse than all nuclear meltdowns combined. And so they're trying to say Chernobyl is the world's worst accident. That has always irked me to no end, and I always challenge it every time I see it. And we see it a lot, each year. We see it several hundred times. We have to challenge it whenever we see it. Beijing has even announced that it would completely suspend the import of aquatic products. So you got South Korea, Taiwan, China, and Japan coordinating through the nuclear industry, International Atomic Energy Agency leading the charge, to hoodwink lethally the Asian population and make them complacent and think about aquatic, but don't think about the 14 prefectures with the 30 million one-ton bags. is a very slippery slope, and my research expeditions clearly show this is an extinction level event. That's been suppressed. It's easy to suppress just to one person like myself, right? They really got 1,000 public relation firms that will suppress me for free. Just for points for the nuclear industry. Let's play this little clip of Al Jazeera where they say, I say 30 million one-ton bags. They say 60 million. Oh, I don't know what that's all about. Hang on. Oh, there's no audio on these. There's no audio on that? How did I end up back in that window? Because we changed. I must have went into the wrong session. My apologies.
There's about 60 million tons of contaminated soil that's being stored, planned to be stored, outside the Fukushima Daiichi perimeter fence. So,
right, that's what Al Jazeera is saying. Or 60
there's about
million.
60 million
now,
tons
30 million one-ton bags,
contaminated soil that's being stored,
pounds.
Planned to be stored.
That's all a one-ton
outside the
pickup truck
Fukushima
can carry.
Daiichi perimeter fence.
So put a one-ton bag back in the back of a one-ton pickup truck. That's 30 million one-ton pickup trucks. That's 5 rows of traffic around the entire planet. The official story is only 2.2 grams got out. And that's the United Nations. United Nations has moved the goalpost this year, and they're claiming these 4 reactors didn't melt down, didn't explode, and didn't lose their inventories. And that's since July the 13th that narrative came out, right? I showed you that at the beginning from a professor in South Korea of nuclear and quantum engineering. Let's get back on track here. Plant remains useless. Yeah. Some of the nuclear facilities' reactors went into meltdown. It's such a vague thing to frame the narrative that way. There's no way anybody's going to glean any kind of insight, into what we're talking about. And so the fuel pools are tower building, so is the reactors. The reactor 3 to your left, that's all 4 reactors. There's 4 of these reactors have lost their inventories. But to me, this is the epitome of impossible. And so when they use remote control cranes, you strip it down, there's really nothing left. And that was the same thing for reactor 4 to your right. So that's originally what the buildings looked like. You can put all the covers on that you wanted, but the buildings still don't exist. Right? Because that's what they done. They put, so reactor 4 to your right, they put a cover over it, but it actually looks the building to your right. You can put all the covers on that you wanted, but it's still the building to the right. It doesn't exist. And they done the same thing with reactor 3. They put a cover over it, but you can put all the covers on that you want it, but that doesn't mean it exists. Right? That's just how it works. So it doesn't physically touch the building underneath it because it obviously is very fragile, right? So reactor 3, they done this, and then they pretended they got the fuel out of the pool. Reactor 4, to your right, they done that and pretended they got the fuel out of the pool. And that's a very, very, very dangerous thing to do. And so if they're willing to do that, who knows what else they've already done? And who knows, and there's no limit to what they will do. And there's 4 of these buildings that you need to be aware of. And they're doing everything in the world to make sure there's no way that you can comprehend it unless you accidentally find me. So to your right is reactor 1 and reactor 2. So they don't look nowhere near as bad as Medusas, right? Because that's a Medusa. And 2 of them are Medusas each. And so officially, that never happened. That's the official story. since 2013. But now the Fisher stories, none of them happened. And that, my friends, is terrifying. So Reactor 1 and Reactor 2, which I don't give you enough loving, they lost 4 decades of reactor cores. They lost 4 decades of reactor cores that were in the fuel pools. So Reactor 1 and the 2 fuel pools, and each of them got decades of reactor cores, is 100% meltdowns. Reactor 2 and the 2 fuel pools at the top of the building was 100% meltdowns. Reactor 3 and the 2 fuel pools at the top of the buildings are 100% meltdowns. Reactor 4 and the 2 fuels at the top of the buildings are 100% meltdowns. By the way, Chernobyl didn't have any fuel pools at the top of the building. And Chernobyl is brutal. If you go back and watch my Chernobyl presentations, look for the one with all the studies. I think I cover around 900 studies. And the idea was that so you can see all the different things they actually studied about Chernobyl. It was just mind-liberating, but mind-blowing, if you're not familiar with it, of how many facets, which is only a fraction of the documentation that I have. And I just blew through like 900 academic studies. You can see, all the people on each of these studies got mortgages and everything else. And that's how they make a living. So you can see the enormous amount of money, but you can also see the enormous amount of different directions that they study radiation. And so all nuclear accidents, you would want to do the same kind of studies. But there's so much more to it. They studied the sex ratio of males and females after Chernobyl in Europe, suggesting that all of Europe was contaminated, and you would see that in a study of sex ratios. So if you got a heavy pollution of radiation, you expect to see more males than females being born. But at the same time, they're going to be looking, if they're studying that, then they're going to be studying autism and Down syndrome, right? And because when they say, oh, no, it's only the mental health, people just radiophobia. No, there's Alzheimer's and dementia and autism, diabetes and Down syndrome and schizophrenias. So there's some real serious, you're seeing that spiking now, right? Post-Fukushima. Some of the nuclear facilities' reactors went into meltdown. It's such as if, I went into meltdown, have a nice day. Causing a nuclear accident. I think 4 reactors and 8 fuel pools melting down is a little bit worse than an accident. No matter how you try to spin it. The worst since Chernobyl. And Chernobyl was a graphite reactor, didn't have any fuel pools. It was a new reactor and didn't have any fuel pools. Fukushima, each of the reactors of Fukushima are 100 Chernobyls. They were pure uranium, pure plutonium. Chernobyl was a graphite reactor. Then he said the water was distilled after being contaminated from contact with the fuel rods at the reactors. The water was distilled. Like, it's nuclear water. It's multiple sieverts per liter. You can't distill it. You got lethal plumes you're releasing if you so-called distill it. Every once in a while we do come across that word, distilling it. Bear with me. Nothing's easy to find except for the important stuff. 2 sieverts an hour of beta radiation emitted from a single liter of the leaked water. So you can't just have betas. You got to have alphas and neutrons and gammas, and then by proxy you're going to have X-rays. And because you're pouring water over a melted reactor core, which is now called a curium. So the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rods is the curium isotopes. And curium isotopes, you need, again, like I said earlier, you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for the plutonium, which is named after the devil. And so, just to blow it off and say, they distilled it. You can't distill that. They're doing, this is obvious, this whole story in particular was written by a nuclear lobbying group, and whoever put their name on it, they got the kickback, right? The water was distilled, really. I'd like to distill a couple of nuclear scientists for just an experiment. Could I get funding for that, I wonder? After being contaminated from contact with fuel rods. So it's so lethal that if you took, a 5-gallon jerry can used for gas or something, of that to a subway station, left it there, everybody walked, and you put it behind a gyprock wall where nobody can see it, and everybody walks past that will die that day or the next day for 1,000,000 years. You can put it at the subway, everybody walks past it all day, every day for 1,000,000 years, is going to drop dead. So to suggest that you can distill this and it's so dishonest, it's so far-fetched, it's such a dangerous, it's, how are you going to have a conversation when they're doing stuff like that, see? Distilled. It really bothers me that somebody can be that evil to say that, to utilize it that way, after being contaminated with contact with the fuel rods. And the tanks on the site held about 1.3 million tons of radioactive water, which is massive. Well, 1.3 million tons, the reactors use 4,500 tons a minute normally, before they get out of control. 1,000,000 gallons a minute, each. So a single reactor on the site can fill up all the tanks 6 times a day. It's complete. Like the tanks were built, and I've done a whole presentation on this on my 4 videos back or 5 or so. You'll see ALPS, Fukushima water ALPS. It's a mixture of groundwater, rain that seeps into the area, and water used for cooling. Now they claim it's 130 tons a day. So that's a garden hose is 140 tons a day. The 3 8-inch garden hose, that's 140 tons a day at 30 psi. So they're claiming that they have a garden hose split 4 ways, and each one of them is poured in on a meltdown at 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures in some places. But they're catching all the water, and they're filtering it. Now the filter now is tens of thousands of sieverts each day, which means you can't get in that building ever again. You can never change the filter. You can't even walk over the pipes from the tanks to the so-called ALP system. And they had the Riva system and the Siri system and the Korean system. And you'll find that in my playlist on this topic. Or go back 4 videos. We got some unique stuff we brought into the conversation. And she's a diehard FC Barcelona fan, knows nothing about nuclear. She follows world sports and likes to write about football, cricket, and tennis. And so she's out there promoting these lies that obviously she wasn't capable of writing. So the Nuclear Lobbying Group wrote the story, sent it to her. She put her name on it, got a kickback. And she published it up where she got an audience of cat lovers, videos, or who knows what. But let me take you through the reality for a minute. Of Fukushima site. Seniors sought frontline radiation cleanup job. Seniors. Not nuclear scientists, not nuclear academics, not nuclear companies, not Bechtel. Japan media, things are going badly. Fukushima is the same as the war, said a military officer in charge of the forces at the plant. Concerned that the workers on site do not consent to join the battle. People are held hostages. Unprecedented ocean contamination leaks are out of control. In fact, when it happened, they were put out to the temporary shelters to send them people who don't mind dying, so to speak. Oh, and we haven't got the audios for that. Son of a gun, because I'll play the audio in the other window.
Another example, immediately after the first hydrogen explosion, Tepco gave out an order a request to all of these.
I'll fix that more. My apologies for everybody.
Send us people who
don't mind dying.
Really very much a panic situation, perhaps. But normally, when you enter any area where there might be
Tokyo Vice Governor suggested Fukushima draft. Sorry. All of Japan must face it. A Fukushima draft. In fact, 16 others were considered should be prepared to die at the Fukushima plant. I wanted to escape the nuclear plant but feared they might hurt me. Unskilled and destitute are the hiring targets because uranium, plutonium, and that's reactor 3 detonating. That's the fuel pools in the reactor cores coming back down. You couldn't drag a nuclear scientist there. You couldn't possibly give enough money because there's so much gamma shines and X-rays and neutron bombardments and beta rays. There's zero possibility you'll get them there, see? Top Tokyo governor dealing with the nuclear workers demand the government step in. Some can't even read. Yeah, that sounds like nuclear scientists to me, Dana. Underage people are employed. That's nuclear children's, nuclear workers' children's, Dana's. Fukushima decontamination workers were threatened or punished if they tried to resist. I can see the headlines. Nuclear scientists were punished if they tried to resist. You couldn't get them there. You couldn't drag them there. They'd tear your eyes out of your heads. We felt like kamikaze pilots, ever-present danger of radiation sickness. Well, it's impossible not to get radioactive sickness if you go there. 800 people disappeared. Yeah, if it was only that many. Fukushima 311 tapes is time to make a geezer. Think about this contempt. That's contempt when you say something like that. A geezer suicide squad. And 16 others should be prepared to die. Right? This is their attitude in nuclear industry, right? You're just totally disposable. If you're not part of the nuclear industry, you're considered disposable. It's just ingrained after so many generations of contempt for every species, not just humans. Even despicable Forbes said it's outrageous that homeless people are being sold to companies put to work in Fukushima. Homeless and the destitute and the victims of society. Even the degenerate United Nations was astounded and said homeless are taken to work in Fukushima ready to die. And at the end of the month, now they're making $11 a day. And so they got to pay for their rent while they're there, and they got to pay for their food. And so that's all stolen from them. And if they get a temperature or they get sick, they're immediately fired. And don't worry, we'll send you a check in 2 weeks, and they're not going to survive 2 weeks. Eh? Mentally handicapped. So, like, whenever somebody any movie portrays nuclear scientists as a hero, give your head a shake. And when it falls off, give it a kick. Better yet, send it to me, I'll give it a kick. There is no such thing as a hero in the nuclear industry. Simply no heroes whatsoever. Including Julius Oppenheimer. Well, that's a lie, actually. He did turn anti-nuclear, and then the industry turned on him. They turned on him. You know, the big thing people don't understand about nuclear waste is splitting atoms. It's the worst case scenario. Like, if you were going to have an alien invasion, that would be the last thing you would want to happen to your planet. Was they would leave this material and it would be splitting anthropogenic man-made atoms that are lethal to everything with replicating cells and releasing it endlessly into your environment. That's what the fuel cycle does. It's insidious how much radiation is released into the environment. The homeless are treated like disposable people. You're considered disposable too, by the way. Workers are tricked to being on the front lines. Tepco raised the safe radiation exposure limits 500 times from 180 counts per minute, which is an evacuation zone. My Geiger counter is 210 counts per minute right now, to 100,000 counts per minute. And counts per minute is physical atoms. So you're literally breathing it in. Not literally, but it's one invisible snowstorm. You can't not but breathe it in. Your filters can't keep it out. Think about 200 million atoms and anthropogenic man-made atoms, dangerous, each one of them dangerous. On the head of a needle, you can't see it. How are you going to filter out any of them, see? They're all the same size. And so you can't filter that. You can't separate that. Ukraine Village Council deputy detonates a grenades. I'm not sure, there's a little controversy over this. Was this flashbangers? Killed 3 people, wounded 20. I can't, now, he's part of the town council there. They were having a meeting. There was a lot of argument back and forth. And people have a right to go there publicly, and they were there and to challenge the corrupt government. He walks in and he set off 4 of these obviously deadly grenades. I don't know if they're real life grenades because I thought everybody in the room would have died. But it killed 3 and seriously wounded, including him, and seriously wounded 20. It's extraordinary. It's hard to comprehend, eh? And he just throws them and everything goes pow. I've never seen nothing like that before, right? That kind of... well, I have when it comes to Ukraine for some reason. Tepco's Fukushima #1 victim compensation costs set to rise. Are they going to compensate all the homeless and destitute and the victims of society working there? Are they going to compensate all the musicians and actors that they blacklisted who were sympathetic to the pro-nuclear community? To the pro-life community, the pro-planet community, the pro-species community, pro-insect community, the pro-having a life community. Because if you're pro-nuclear, you're anti-life, anti-species, anti-insects, anti-family, you're anti-humanity. Tepco's Fukushima #1 victims compensation costs set to rise. And they're just 90% of the money goes to administrations, eh? So it's that time where they need a big influx to keep the people they already bought off greased up again. Nuclear activists to be constantly spied upon, 2013. Does anybody really think they're not spying on me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? Let's be realistic. Does anybody really think that there's over 1,000 public relation firms dedicated to the nuclear industry? And how are they going to justify their incomes, their enormous salaries, their enormous perks? And they only got me basically to pick on. Yeah, there's a few people out there. I'm the only one running an educational program, though. An actual real life hardcore. What I do is hardcore too. I do research too, right? 4 to 5 months a year sometimes. Boots on the ground, field studies. This year we've seen all the species fail, right, on the research expeditions. A 4 to 10% survival of the fledglings of the birds. The couple of residential species we managed to find. The migratory ones didn't show up. 46 million migratory birds didn't show up. I wonder what that means. If they don't show up here and they didn't show up anywhere else, guess what? The growth reflected a revision in December last year of government's criteria. Government? For compensation to people affected by the unprecedented triple meltdown. See, they don't count that billing, so it's a triple meltdown. They don't count that. They're both the official pictures. They're both the official pictures. Like the best energy is geothermal. You don't need nuclear. Just geothermal. Why would you look at nuclear? Nuclear is disgusting, right? And so the only thing that makes any sense is geothermal and back it up with wind and solar and then the storage. right? There you go, James Lucid. Got a really good habit of articulating it. I spent an hour trying to tell the story. James comes in and goes, Max Milk distilled the food chain. Hi, Stephen Young. And I mean, that's the reality right there, period. I mean, anybody really think that's not what happened? And how can you say triple meltdown and not include Reactor 4, which is the fourth one they refuse to acknowledge? Why? How is that not a meltdown when 4 decades of reactor cores are gone and 2 fuel pools at the top of the building? The reactor was half full of fuel because they were refueling it. They don't take all the fuel out. And that the 4 pictures to the right is just a fraction of the media pretending they're in a building that don't even exist. You can see why they got me censored so I don't exist. 2011 nuclear meltdown. They don't even call it a nuclear meltdown. They call it a meltdown. They don't even call it a nuclear reactor meltdown. They call it a nuclear reactor melt. They don't even use the word down anymore, right? And that's why my videos typically now, nuclear reactor melt, which makes me feel stupid every time I put it there, but that's one of the few ways you can get away from the censorship, the artificial censorship that is algorithms, right? And I think I'm just censored anyway, but I don't think I know. Another factor is an increase in compensation of fishery operators due to the releases of the oceans of the tritium. So to suggest that only tritium got into the reactors, I think anybody that does that should be arrested and get 25 to 30 years minimum for a single offense. That's how egregious it is to suggest that there's tritium is something you should worry about. And you should, but I mean, you got to worry about the actual meltdowns, the loss of multiple nuclear fuel pools, for goodness sakes. Another factor is an increased compensation of fishery operators. Tritium. And so the money we're talking about is 15.4 trillion yen. 15.4 trillion yen is 145 million Canadian. I'm sorry, 145 billion Canadian. So 90% of that goes to administration, right? 1.3 trillion of it will go to compensation to victims affected by the nuclear accident. You mean they're not sorted out after almost 13 years? Oh, that's right, they're not either, are they? Which is 12 billion, but the lawyers will suck up at least half of it. A big chunk of that will go to the administration, and the people that are trying to get any compensation will have to fight for 10 years. And even then, they'll be lucky to get anything out. They'll literally go insane before they finally get any restitution. 600 billion will be used for interim facility to store contaminated soil. And then, what are you talking about? You spent 24 billion to 27 billion USD on the soil already, which is only from 3% of the land in a single prefecture. And 14 prefectures were banned by 55 countries for a decade. So 5.8 billion Canadian is going to go towards 1-ton bags. Because they got it's probably hard for most, well, if you're not familiar with the subject, maybe just devil into it for a second. I got a kind of unique way to tell that story. Just tell the truth, right? Like, the whole story is maddening. Let me see, I got a couple of pictures that really tell the story. I can't always seem to find them. I got to move them. Here we go. I can't find the picture I want. Oh, there she is. So there's 105,000 sites. You look up that story 2019, they probably got it pulled down by now. There's 105,000, because they like doing that, I'll tell you that much. 105,000 on-site storage locations. That's one of them. Millions of one-ton bags. Now, they're growing food right alongside the nuclear meltdown with thousands of one-ton bags right alongside of them. And that's not the only spot. There's tons of places like that. They got 105,000 of these storage sites. 105,000. So, yeah, they need another 5 million every few years. 5 billion, rather, every few years. And you got to grease all the palms of the people they bought off and the government, which is the worst thing could happen to a planet we know now as a government. So each bag, they're going to spend $188 on it, basically. But, of course, 90% of it goes to administration, right? They're going to steal 90% of it. So only 10% of it will actually go to physical work. That's quite interesting, though. And separately, decommissioning work for the reactor is expected to cost 8 trillion yen, boosting total expenses to deal with the aftermath of the nuclear accident to 23.4 trillion, which is 216 trillion Canadian. But it's actually, the real estimates is going to be around $1 billion. $1 trillion US, rather, I'm sorry. The compensation costs are also shouldered by the nuclear power plant operators other than Tepco. No. All nuclear plants across the country raised the price of electricity. That extra money goes to Tepco, which is the Japanese government, because it was nationalized, right? Their shares went down to 6 cents a share. So somebody would have bought all that up. And that would be the Japanese government people, see? That were in the know. Fukushima, Japan's triple threat in spades. Again, right, suggesting that there's only 3 meltdowns. And it's JOHN LaForge. John is a proficient lawyer. I thought he was a good person, but he's not. He's a proficient lawyer. Japan from August of 24 when the dumping started. The dumping started when the meltdown started, John. And I sent John pictures of the reactors, and he said he didn't read any academic studies that said that that was real. That was his reply to me. He didn't see any academic studies saying that that happened. So I'm like, well, John, the reactor cores and the fuel pools are gone. He said, well, there's no studies out there showing that. You have a nice day, sir. Over 1 million tons of radioactive cooling water accumulated in huge tanks. The tanks were built so you didn't look at that. The tanks were built so you thought that everything was in the tanks, which according to South Korea Professional and the United Nations and the International Atomic Energy Agencies and UNSCLEAR and Europe and the IPRC and the rest of them, which are all United Nations, by the way, is that never happened. There's only 2.2 grams, and they're only released 1/16th of a gram, 116.666 of a gram each year for 30 years. That's the official story. Nothing got out. Not a bit. Nothing, Dana. Yeah, they picked up 30 million one-ton bags, but they were just practicing in case a nuclear accident happens in Japan one day. It was collected from groundwater, it was poured over or run through 900 tons of melted reactor fuel, says JOHN LaForge. Each reactor building had 4 decades of reactor cores stored into it, first off. The buildings actually detonated and ejected the reactor cores and the fuel pools right out of the buildings in those two. And the fuel pool of Reactor 1. Reactor 1's reactor core went China syndrome, so to speak, down into the earth. Reactor 2, the fuel pools and the reactor cores burnt constantly for several days, and then they went China syndrome. They hit water tables and hydrovolcanic action where it split the earth open from the expansion of the steam, because a liter of water will expand 1,200 cubic feet, right? And so it split the earth open in 6 places. The steam coming out of the ground, sustained for years, was at 10 sieverts, but that was the max the Geiger counters could reach. And so, but once the Geiger counter reaches these high numbers, you have broken Geiger counter. The Geiger counter needs to be replaced. But nobody can survive that exposure, because 3 sieverts is a lethal dose. So imagine 6 places, the steam coming out of the ground is 7 sieverts. This bioaccumulates, and the whole site at some points were covered in these plumes. You totally evacuate the site for extended periods. These are not conjectures. JOHN LaForge is refusing to be honest. I can tell you that much. And so what else is he up to? Is the frightening part for me. Rubbished. That the 3 power reactors were rubbished. How can you disassociate yourself from meltdowns but be worried about nuclear weapons, John? How does that actually work? So to suggest that that's rubbished and that the dumping only started on August the 24th, when it clearly started immediately and has never stopped, is very disappointing. We're rubbished. John is rubbished. JOHN LaForge. Melt through. How come you can't show him a picture, John? I sent you lots of them. Tepco, and so then he goes and he goes with Tepco's version. Since the radiation disaster, he's a very dangerous person, eh? I sent him the documentation and conversed with him briefly until he stabbed me in the back and said there was no papers to back up the pictures. I was like, well, what do you need an academic study to back up the picture for? It's not rocket science. Japan slams sensationalist UK tabloid report linking mass fish deaths to Fukushima water. So they had 2,200 pounds, was it? Or 2.2 million pounds? Two 2.2 million pounds or something. And what is interesting is I actually went out and done research expeditions. That's me in better days. We're still doing research with the Zodiacs. The species to your left are actually exterminated post-Fukushima. And I went back for 6 years. They didn't recover. And that was the idea, going back to see if they actually recovered. But the species to your left, you will never take the pictures again. They're actually exterminated. That's an extinction event, right? And I know because, and the actual assault that they done to me while I was out there doing the research and couldn't defend myself was stunning. And they still haven't stopped today, right? They constantly attack him, right? I'm surprised Calm Down Charlie hasn't harassed me by now. Tonight. The Japanese government has expressed its anger and disappointment over a British tabloid report. The Japanese government are just vicious thugs. They're completely dishonest. 1,200 tons. 1,200 tons is 2.4 million pounds of sardines. Well, they don't give us another reason either. Like, this is open ocean. So to suggest that it's hypoxia that killed. That's one of the suggestions they got there. It's just ludicrous. Foreign minister to visit Fukushima Prefecture. Foreign minister. That's her there, I believe. During the visit to Tokyo Electric Power Holding Company, which is actually the Japanese government because they're nationalized, Fukushima Daiichi Nuclear Power Station exchanged views with officials on Japan's efforts regarding the discharge of the ELP system into the seas, as well as visit the Iwaki city to exchange views with local fishery officials. Okay, so because we got that on our poll tonight anyway, so let's just bring up that information because that warrants it, right? Let's bring up the ELP system very quick and make sure everybody is well versed in that narrative with the proper documentation. Because people like JOHN LaForge are out there sabotaging humanity's future. And we have to worry about that stuff. It's a legitimate concern for everybody. Everything with replicating cells, no matter. Here we go. So the Areva system in 2014, 3 years later, has yet to function reliably. Well, the problem was, once you turned it on, you couldn't get near it. They knew that, right? It was built to manipulate you. That's what the tanks are there for. They built them all in 2013. In 2014, in August, 3.5 years later, the Areva system, which is the same type of system, which is France's system, has never been used and was kept out of operation. Because you know the minute you turn it on, you couldn't get back in the building, see? You're talking about 100 million becquerels per cubic centimeter, and we're not talking about tritium. Per cubic centimeter, that's quite an interesting way to measure this. And a becquerel is a pulse of energy. And so you're talking about 100 million atoms, physical atoms, pulsing energy almost at the speed of light every second per cubic centimeter. And so to suggest that anything coming out of them is tritium, we got a poll about it tonight. I'll bring it up. Our pro-nuclear media who claimed Fukushima nuclear water, only has tritium, and they should be calling it tritium-3H, and try finding that out there. Are they actually mass-murdering monsters? Well, there's no other... You can't sugarcoat these mass-murdering serial killers. This is genocide and omnicide. This is actually an omnicide against all species, not just the humans. But humans are definitely targeted. Tepco also, the groundwater bypass operation didn't work. They were going to build a fence for $1 billion. That didn't work. The ice wall obviously didn't work. Why would you build an ice wall? Why would you even... How the hell did we ever get there? Well, because the taxpayers would pay for it because it's an experimental. But obviously you would use a real wall. Why would you use an ice wall? Because the ice will cause the neutrons to reflect back and cause criticality because everything. But again, you got no top, you got no bottom. So it's meant to stop water from ingressing into the site. But the other side of it is cause liquefaction at the site itself. So the buildings become unstable. And if you've ever seen the buildings, unstable is the order of the day, right? The buildings are unstable. Right? The buildings are unstable. And if you go way back, everybody acknowledges this place is completely out of control, that they lost control, that, they left the country, not just Tokyo. Everybody acknowledged that originally. And there was a lot of people trying to warn you. And they got replaced by people that hate you. This could one day be considered the start of the ultimate catastrophe of the world and the planet. And that's the proper way to look at it. This isn't an apocalyptic scenario. This is an extinction level event. This is what Julius Oppenheimer was warning you about. And that's why he was demonized and vilified and marginalized and ostracized. Officials unsure what to do next. Korea calls Japan's handling of Fukushima incompetent. This wasn't incompetence. This is United Nations is calling the shots. Not you need a fall guy, and the fall guy is Tepco, right? Because that way you don't blame the nuclear industry. And then you have media with big reaches like Yahoo. We need more nuclear. And then their narrative is based on Conference of Parties 28. And when Conference of Parties 28 started this year, they took me down for 7 days. They gave me a strike that lasted for 7 days. So I couldn't come out like I did the last couple of years and cover their narrative, which is what I was planning on doing. I had announced it the day before they took me down that I was going to cover it for every day. And, I just got out of the hospital after surgery, and I'm immediately under siege. The problem with nuclear is it's very hard to store the energy they generate. Well, that's not true. That's nowhere near true. That's completely dishonest. And, well, when it comes to nuclear, that's what you're getting. You're getting dishonesty, and they'll scuttle everything out there in order to keep nuclear. I mean, the best stuff out there is geothermal. My goodness, how can you compete against geothermal? And so geothermal has been left to rot. They're still struggling. When the tech, they're spending how much a year on the fabled fusion? How much are they spending on the idiotic small modular reactors? They don't even have a full application into the regulatory agencies. That's not going to go nowhere. And they knew it too. That's why NuScale failed, right? That they stole a big amount of money in that Ponzi scheme, right? Every new investor was to pay off the old investors. They kept that going for 5 years. And then now they're being sued. And so it'll be pretty interesting, the stuff that'll, when the truth comes out about how they done that. Let me show you some couple of storage techniques. I got all kinds of them, but the big, really good storage techniques, when they say there's no way to store it, store the energy, there's tons of ways to store it. So pumped hydro, I also like the water batteries, where you have two isolated man-made bodies of water, and you pump water up, right? And then when there's no wind or sun, the water slowly comes down and turns to generator, which technologies Nikola Tesla has never changed, right? And there's another really unique way is compressed air storage. This one was $54 million they spent, but now they can store, the biggest one they're building right now in California stores 10 gigawatt hours. 10 million hours. So all they do is dig big caverns and pump air down there. And you can buy the windmills now that only compress air, for instance. Makes it much easier to do it, right? And then the heat generated from compressing the air is stored in salt at around 600-700 degrees Fahrenheit. And so when you want to reuse the compressed air, which is only at about 120 psi, you have this heat that's stored you can use to unpack the air, make it expand even quicker. So it's about 90% efficient. There's nothing out there that can touch it, except for geothermal. So it's very dishonest to suggest there's no way to store it, because there's infinitely more ways than that to store energy that's well known and that we've covered many times. The batteries that hold power in electric vehicles are the costliest component of the car, and they still don't pack as much range as a gas engine. And so, like, whenever you see them leaning that way, well, we don't have battery packs to store energy, so we need nuclear, you're being led to the poison well. These people have are very nasty people that would do that to you. I don't know if it's appropriate to call them people, to tell you the truth. And they say that has no carbon emissions, nuclear energy. This is ludicrous. Well, like nuclear, let me show you. It's such a dirty energy, it's hard to comprehend as somebody, and this is what they do though, how they can suggest that it's resource free. Like carbon is really important anyway. Here, let's tell the story another way. Why not? What do we got to lose? It doesn't hurt to tell. We don't usually go down this road anymore so often. We used to bring it in. I mean, there's lots of terrorists here. There's the shoe bomber and nuclear scientists. There's no different. They're both terrorists, right? And the nuclear scientists will try to convince you that fallout from a nuclear meltdown or nuclear plants is like sunshine, or even walking in it, or like the natural rocks or bananas and potatoes. But this is completely dishonest. It's completely disproportionate of reality. That, like, when you can't get close to a ship, which is bringing it to the ocean to drop it overboard, by the way, and Britain done it for 30 years, just went driving along, dumping it overboard. And these barrels, as they're sinking every 30 feet, they got an extra almost 15 pounds per square inch on them. They're going to collapse at about 150 feet, for sure. So it's immediately released into the environment. They just drive along, dumping it over, la-di-da-di-da. You know, Fukushima, you still can't go to the majority of the graveyards. That headline was 7 years later. But the reality of it is that you do not want to go to these graveyards. You picked up 30 million one-ton bags you emit, and some people are suggesting 60 million. And then when you take all the pollution from gas, oil, and coal and add it up, it's nothing compared to the nuclear. All of these drums will rot, and that will go into the water tables right away when it does. And not only that, they've had, if you think about what Hanford done, that's Hanford site right there. If you think about what Hanford really done, they dumped so much into the soil, sludge, like from a chain reaction sludge, still splitting the atom sludge, into the soil. It's equal to a 6-foot aquarium, 518 feet tall, and wrapped around the entire planet more than once. Imagine a wall around the planet 518 feet tall. Now imagine that wall is an aquarium full of nuclear waste. Yet they got the arrogance, the hubris, to claim that it can all fit into an Olympic-sized swimming pool. You couldn't fit the dead bodies in the paper suits into a swimming pool that they killed at Fukushima alone, for goodness sakes. These people will die that day. They're spraying reagents. So they would have died that day. So would that person there. In a paper suit, no less. And Tepco was bragging that they burned 7,000 paper suits a day in their incinerators. But there's no evidence to suggest 7,000 people has ever been on that site, total, let alone each day. And when you look at the legacy of nuclear, it's hard to comprehend how much pollution we're actually talking about these disease factories create before they're even up and running. Just the whole process of mining and chemicals, and these chemical ponds they abandon, right? You know, like Navajo has 15,000 abandoned mines, but they're full of chemical ponds too. That pond you see there is chemicals. They're evaporated into the environment on top of that. But if you look at what it does to the drinking water, all these places you shouldn't never drink the drinking water, and anywhere they've done that, you do not want to live within 100 miles of it. And if you look at where they put all their missiles and silos, they were using the communities as human shields, right? Because you're putting all these missiles in communities. So they're using the communities as human shields. So if they were warring with another country and they attack any of these missile silos, they're not going to say they attacked the missile silos. They attacked a little town in Arkansas or a little town in Wyoming or a little town in Nebraska. And we're going to sit there and let them do that to our loved ones. Let's go to war. That's what they've done to you. And that's what they're doing to you again. That's the nuclear industry. It's only good at one thing, stabbing you in the back. It's very, very good at it. It's got it down to a friggin' science. You know, after Chernobyl, 3 million children required treatment because of Chernobyl. Many will die prematurely. So they're acknowledging 3 million children, for goodness sakes, got sick, needed health care. If you need health care from radioactive poisoning, it's forever, right? You're compromised immune system. You're more susceptible to pathogens and viruses and illnesses and diseases because of that. And this is how they faked Reactor 4. They stripped it down. They put this contraption off site, and then they assemble it at the site with the remote control things and the home list where necessary. And then they claim up here was the fuel pool when there was nothing left, right? They built this contraption. It doesn't even physically touch the building. Do you really think they abandoned the malls, the supermarkets, the schools, the banks, the car lots, the museums, the graveyards because it's harmless and innocuous and benign? You really think they're dumping it out into the ocean because it's harmless? And everybody that protests is demonized, and as it always goes, people get tired and they move on with their lives. But the worst thing you can do is move on with your life when it comes to nuclear. You know why they left all the food behind? Because it's a nuclear wasteland. This cracks me up. This was the Fukushima 50. They said they didn't want to be questioned by the media, and then the media should leave them alone. And so the media said, we're not going to question them. They published this picture. But you can't tell the difference in Fukushima 50 or the other people, see? So why would you pretend you're hiding behind a tarp? They ran away and left all the animals behind, pets behind, to starve to death. No water, no food. Because the nuclear industry, like, oh, you got to get out of there. We don't want to have bad statistics show up later. Protect Hong Kong activists from retaliation by authorities. This Agnes Chow, she was put in prison because she wanted freedom. She's here in Canada right now, and they're vowing to get her. She lives in Toronto, where she's asked what her dream for the future is. She replies simply to live in freedom. And we must not forget that there are countless other Agnes Chows still living in Hong Kong. My apologies if I butcher anybody's name. John Lee, Beijing's handpicked chief executive of the Hong Kong Special Administration Region, had directly threatened her. He declared the police will do their utmost to pursue her, to arrest her, and fugitives will be sued for their lifetime unless they turn themselves in. Right? They're the first ones to tell you Fukushima didn't melt down. Those exact same people. And we wish her the best. California regulators vote to extend Diablo Canyon nuclear plant operations through 2030. So they didn't build anything to replace it. They had the monetary, they had the authority, and they had the time. And they still have the time to replace it. But they didn't, because they had no intention to replace that. So, well, we can't get rid of it. We got nothing to replace it with, Dana. Yeah, but that was built into the equation, that you had the money to replace it, to build something to replace it. Could have just built geothermal for every community. That's all you really got to do, isn't it? Problem solved. California regulators vote to extend Diablo Canyon nuclear plant operation through 2030. And that's the Chris Hansen, the chairman of the U.S. Non-Regulatory Commission, and Rob Lewis, little butt plug, Robbie. California energy regulators voted to allow Diablo Canyon for another 5 years. But you got to be an environmentalist if you oppose nuclear. You're an environmentalist. You can't be a person. You got to put a label on you, right? You're environmentalist or an activist. Condemned extension and noted the project's costs to continue to run the aging plant are expected to be US $6 billion. Well, for $6 billion, you can build enough geothermal to replace it. It's paid for. They're done. One done deal. And the ratepayers are going to pay for it. And the idea is to discourage you from coming up with solutions. We see it over and over and over and over and over when it comes to nuclear. Again, I showed you the beginning, or did I? The nuclear current generation, 365 gigawatts. This year alone, that's total capacity worldwide, 365 gigawatts. But renewables this year is expected to be 440 gigawatts, which is almost 100 times more than the entire, that's in 1 year now, than the entire 70 year of building nuclear reactors. And by 2025, 91 reactors are expected to go offline. So they're going to give them extensions for a few years. But these things are brittle. That's why they need to go offline. It's because they suffer from a neutron bombardment. And so the material is brittle. Now, these reactors are probably at 1,000 pounds per square inch or higher. And so the last thing you need is brittle, lethal, and past its lifetime. And it's past its lifetime. In fact, the original charters called for 30 years because of that particular attribute. And with California's annual renewable energy additions exceeding Diablo Canyon's output, zero reason to keep it running. So they already got the renewables to, but if you've done geothermal, my goodness, 90% of that site has to go to a nuclear dump, and there ain't no nuclear dumps. After 80 years, they still haven't come up with any solutions because it's splitting atoms into the environment, and that's what they want. The more atoms, the less life you can have on the planet, right? And the more atoms released into the environment after 80 years, you compromise the weather of the planet. Because think of an invisible snowstorm that pulses energy almost at the speed of light for 80 years. And then you kill off the bases of the food chain, the bases of the oxygen chain, the bases of the carbon sequestering chain. How do you think that's going to end up? California voted to extend the life of the last disease factory. And these are disease factories. The fuel pools are hemorrhaging radiation 24 hours a day because they're all splitting atoms on a numbers and rate and intensity that terrifies anybody that even tries to comprehend it being realistic. It's absurd amount from every nuclear power plant. There's 1,000 fuel pools worldwide hemorrhaging isotopes into the air because there's no containment. They're all that fuel is still splitting atoms. And that's what they don't tell you about nuclear fuel. Why is nuclear fuel dangerous? Well, because it's splitting atoms. It's so evil, it's hard to comprehend that this is actually able to happen. When you go down the rocky road of nuclear and you start adding it up, and we do that here 5 days a week when we can, then it's quite frightening. EDF told not to expect the United Kingdom to step in to fund a flagship nuclear disease factory. Cost overruns. What's the price tag now? I might have it here. There's some 32.7 billion, which is 41 billion US dollars for a stupid nuclear plant. And these plants are surrounded by farms, right? Right, they're surrounded by farms. It's hard for me to comprehend it. This guy here, Jack Spencer, unbelievably dishonest person. And he's with the Heritage Foundation. As soon as I seen that, I was like, oh, those people. So there's a lot of people trying to promote nuclear. Nuclear is dying out of that, thank goodness. Look who's going all in on nuclear energy. Uncle Sam and Miss America. Man, we come across her a lot, don't we? She's a first-year university student, and they're calling her a nuclear engineer. It's hard for me to wrap my mind around it. Uranium prices at a 15-year high because of sprout physical uranium. They bought up all the physical uranium at $30 a pound, right? And they didn't do nothing with it. They didn't try to sell it or anything like that. They didn't take possession of it. They just bought it. Let it stay where it was too. And then that artificially inflated the price of uranium because miners need to produce more now, right? And for the last 2 years, they've been doing this rinse and recycle with the investors, artificially inflating it. And then it goes up a couple of dollars on a share. And then you got all the, like, the Globe and Mail from British Columbia, for instance, Canada. They've been doing it 3 days a week hard, promoting uranium stocks the whole time, right? I've done entire presentations just on their scam. Grace Stanky, Miss America 2023 is using her newfound fame to push for one specific form of zero carbon energy. I debunked that earlier tonight, by the way, if you're not just joining us. After studying as a nuclear engineer, she's especially qualified. She's the furthest thing from qualified. She's not even a first-year student yet. She's still going to school. Here's her first year. You know, jack shit about nuclear. Knows nothing. She literally knows nothing unless you read it, the propaganda. And that's what she's repeating, is this unbelievable propaganda. Her legacy is genocide now. She's somebody you should fear, for goodness sakes. And yet she thinks she has the moral high ground. And it's hard for me to wrap... Like, they know she's an idiot. And so she's a useful idiot for the nuclear industry. And they're going to just use and abuse. That's what they're really good at. She's the last one that's qualified to have a conversation, by far. She said it saved her, cured her dad from cancer twice. Well, if it cured him, why did he get cancer a second time? I mean, this is a... Right? Obviously, they know she's an idiot. Very gullible. Let's not say an idiot, but very gullible. And they are using her. That's why she got... There's lots of prettier, more talented women with bachelors of science and everything else. Why did she become it? Because she's pro-nuclear and she's stupid. Let's call her what it is. She's a moron when it comes to nuclear. That's the only reason she's getting the platform. U.S. nuclear regulators issue a construction permit for a reactor that uses molten salt. No, this is a test reactor to test out fuel, which is a high assay fuel, right? Again, they were dependent upon Russia for the fuel. Their small modular reactors can't exist without this high-grade, weapons-grade fuel. Constructions of the first EPR unit at Hinkley Point. Yeah, how's that going, Dana? Well, first off, it's the most resource-intensive industry in human history. It's the biggest construction job in human history. It's hard to comprehend how big the site actually is, but everything, all these white things sticking up are the world's biggest cranes. They need 2 gas, oil, and coal plants dedicated to build it, to run it for its lifetime, and for 100 years to decommission it. These are the most resource-intensive. Everything there is triple inspected. Not only is it the best of the best material, the best of the best. Cement, the best of the best. Steel, the best of the best. Wire, the best of the best everything. It's triple inspected by 3 different organizations. There's 9,000 people working there every day, and they're going to be a decade behind schedule. It's the stupidest thing imaginable until you realize what it's actually all about. If you think of it as a genocide machine, then you're in the right picture. And they're surrounded by farms as far as you can see. Do you get it, They've been doing it for 60 years in the United Kingdom and everywhere else worldwide. All nuclear power plants, except for a few, are surrounded by farms. All of them. And these are enormous. It's hard to comprehend how big. But I mean, they got farms right up to the property. That's what you see every nuclear plant, every nuclear site. But this site is a particularly nasty disease factory. It's a massive disease factory. It's ridiculous how evil it actually is. So when you zoom in, you start to comprehend that big picture, see? And that still doesn't do it justice, see? So if you concentrate in on a little section, you start to realize, oh my goodness, this is the resources. The resources are, it's impossible to comprehend how much resources we're actually talking about. Despicable nuclear. It's only good for one thing, is genocide and omnicide. It's very, very good at all of them, right? And the resources, this is our last story, but the resources, it's so hard to comprehend it when you're looking far away, but when you start getting up close, just running all of these lights is a stunning amount of electricity. But just to produce all the metal and steel and cement, there's enough cement to build a sidewalk to Rome, for goodness sakes. The resources are unbelievable. It's unbelievable. There's 10,000 workers and 3,500 British companies. 10,000 employees for almost 2 decades. And the resources, ultimately, that goes into it, it's stunning. And then the fallout, 30 million one-ton bags, all the dumping into the oceans that they've done, and then come out and mock you and claim that it's like potatoes and bananas and walking in sunshine. Actual real-life monsters. And saying they got no solutions for storage when they got tons of solutions. And that everybody in the nuclear industry knows what's going on. They participate in it. And that the research expeditions that we've done, if that doesn't worry you, then you need counseling. I'd like to thank James Luce that donated 200 last week, and Stephen Young donated 50. So big hugs for everybody for doing that for me. I never done nothing all week, and I decided to work all weekend, and I need to recover from. It's been a tough year, right? Heart attacks and throwing up blood and bleeding, supposed to get a kidney out, and just total pandemonium all year. And I still never lost the faith. I still never lost the will or the drive, or because we got no choice. We got to get this right. We're not allowed to make a mistake. So that was great. We made it through our show. I never got quite everything out tonight. I can feel my throat's a little bit raw. Let's come in and close the poll tonight. Our pro-nuclear media claim Fukushima nuclear water only has tritium, actually mass murdering monsters. And we got a stunning, overwhelmingly yes. And we had almost double votes on the poll as we did thumbs up. I noticed our thumbs up on the poll stopped about 40 minutes ago. Doesn't matter. everybody. Thanks for everybody. See everybody tomorrow night. Have a great night and a great day tomorrow. We'll catch everybody